Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in good spirits wherever you are in the world. And I would like to continue on with the Q&A videos. As always, I'm very humbled and very flattered and very honored that you would submit questions to me and ask me my views or my opinions or my comments on a particular topic. So once again, my deepest gratitude and thanks to all of you. And continuing with that, I'd like to have this Q&A video. By my count, this is Q&A part 17. So I am at the video where I was asking for questions to be submitted, and so it's picking up where I left off. The next question is from Armon Esfandiari. So Armon, hello my friend, I hope you're well. And you say, "Hi Daisuke, hope you are well. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on Mike Lee, and do you have any favorites of his filmography? Mine are Meantime, Naked, and Life is Sweet. I was also wondering, what are your thoughts on P.T. Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson, and if you have any favorites of his filmography. Mine is Punch Drunk Love, which I really hope you make a film club live stream on one day. And lastly, I was wondering if you have any thoughts on Timothée Chalamet. Thanks, Daisuke." Okay, great. So Armon, thank you very much for your 3 questions. So really well done. So I will, let's see, maybe I'll answer them in the inverse order, the reverse order, starting with the last one first. So you ask, what are my thoughts on the actor Timothée Chalamet? So I saw fairly recently, I think, I saw the film Call Me By Your Name, and I was very quite affected by that film and Timothée Chalamet's performance. So I was very impressed with that. And as you may or may not know, I'm really poor when it comes to watching recent releases of films, and so I haven't seen all of his recent performances yet, but what I've seen of him, I think I'm very impressed. And so I know he's going to be appearing in the next Wes Anderson film, and also I think he's going to be in Dune, right? He's going to be in the next film adaptation version of Dune. So I'm looking forward to those 2 films very much. So that's my general thoughts about that. And then your second question is about Paul Thomas Anderson, and you mentioned Punch Drunk Love. And so, yes, I haven't spoken about Paul Thomas Anderson here, but I too am a great admirer of his works. I really love Punch Drunk Love as well. I would probably add to that list, at least my own personal list, is There Will Be Blood. I think I'm not the only one, of course, but let me join the chorus of people who really admire and appreciate that. I remember seeing that when it was first released in the theater, and that was just I mean this in a positive way, it was very exhausting in terms of the journey that we were asked to go on when we saw this film, and it took certain it made certain choices along the way that I remember being there at the theater, and I was very struck by them, and it was very moving. But I always had to remember just the kind of characters that we were watching on screen, and the kinds of ways in which we were, on the one hand, maybe being sympathetic or feeling sympathetic towards these people, but on the other hand, they weren't always necessarily the most the best examples of high morality in humanity. Let me put it that way. And so I found that inner struggle that the film seems to engender in viewers like myself. I found it to be very fascinating and quite a masterful, difficult juggling act, I think, on the part of Paul Thomas Anderson. But I think he performed it very well. And maybe just to add one more, I'm a big fan of Magnolia, and I always will. And I listen to the Amy Mann songs on a fairly regular basis, and I remember just listening to that a lot when I was in college. I think was around the time it was released, and I was seeing it in the theater, and I was really swept away with it. It was quite a remarkable achievement for a lot of reasons. It was very surprising. It had that wonderful tapestry quilt, patchwork-like quality with the various characters. Had a very, of course, Robert Altman feel, and of course, Paul Thomas Anderson, as you know, there's a certain kinship, spiritual kinship, shall we say, with the filmography and cinema of Robert Altman. So it was nice to see that emerge in his films, including Magnolia. But there's just so much about that film that I think is quite remarkable and fascinating that I really admire it even now. So, but I could go on for a long time about Paul Thomas Anderson. You know, one of these days I really should do more about the works of Paul Thomas Anderson. You asked about a Punch Drunk Love live stream. Okay, I'll certainly think about it. That I think would be an interesting one, and I know it's a pretty popular title in the Criterion Collection, so maybe there might be a number of people who'd be interested in that, but let me see what I can do about that. That's a good suggestion. And then your first question is about the filmmaker Mike Leigh, the British filmmaker Mike Leigh, and you mentioned that some of your favorites are Meantime, Naked, and Life is Sweet. I love those films. So those three films happen also to be included in the Criterion Collection, as you know. So those are great choices. But oh gosh, those are really wonderful. And they can be quite tough sometimes. In particular, Naked. That can be a really tough film, but that is a brilliant work of art. They all are brilliant works of art. Life is Sweet. Oh my goodness. I've seen that film so many times I've forgotten. And Meantime, yes, you bring up Meantime, which is it's such a, oh gosh, it's so much like his films in it. It just acts on its own in terms of its own character and its own tapestry and environment and world. That's one of the great things about Mike Leigh's works. You know, they're the same with each other, and yet they have their own character and feel. I mean, you just think about films like Topsy Turvy, for instance, or Happy Go Lucky, or something like that, or another film that I really admire a lot, and I saw a lot when it was out, was the film All or Nothing. I don't know how admired it is in the grand scheme of Mike Leigh's filmography relative to his other films, but I think that's a powerful work. And I just remember seeing it many, many times when it came out. Also, when it came out, I saw many, many times was the film, the film Career Girls. That's another one. I'm not sure how much attention it gets in the overall grand scheme of Mike Leigh's filmography, but I remember just watching that film many times when it came out in the theater. I think I was in college at that time as well, and so I just went to the movie theater a lot to watch Career Girls. I just absolutely fell in love with that film. And then the film before that, which is one of his most famous works, is Secrets and Lies. And I think that I saw that film in the theater when it came out, and I saw it in the theater again and again when it was still there. And then when it was on video, I watched it over and over again. And I then saw it fairly recently, and it holds up so well. And I saw so many things in it in these more recent watches of the film that I hadn't recognized in my earlier explorations of the films when I was a little bit younger. I think that is just it is such an enthralling work that is doing so much at once. I mean, Mike Leigh's films tend to do this, but that film in particular, Secrets and Lies, the way it handles and juggles all the stuff that's going on, and it just makes it all come to a boil, and just really it just lashes out in unpredictable and very cathartic ways. That is a brilliant example of Mike Leigh's filmography. Really, really brilliant. So, but anyway, yeah. So I do have a great affinity and affection for the works of Mike Leigh, and so I'm very glad you answered this question. So thank you very much, Armon, and I hope you're well. Thank you very much. Next, we have a question from Marco Aref. So hello, Marco, and thank you very much for your question. And you say, hello, Daisuke. I recently came across your channel and have loved all your content. I also have a question, and I think you're the perfect person to ask. I watched Rumblefish the other day and thought it was great. Are there any movies similar to Rumblefish you could recommend? Oh gosh, well, first of all, Marco, thank you very much for your very kind comment. That's very, very kind of you, and it's nice to see you here. I'm honored. So let's talk a lot on this channel. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about this. So the film you mentioned is Rumblefish. So the Francis Ford Coppola film Rumblefish. So yes, this is a film also that I really need to talk more about. I have a lot of things that I'd love to say about this film Rumblefish. Gosh, what a remarkable film, what a memorable work that is on so many levels, both in terms of emotional content and also the visuals and the style that is being employed. Such an interesting work. And so I'm glad to read that you thought it was great. So, and you asked for similar films to Rumblefish. Now, this is a very difficult question, actually, because I think you can answer it in many different ways. Similar in terms of tone, similar in terms of visual style, similar in terms of a kind of approach, or similar in terms of other things. And perhaps, maybe I could answer it, if you like the story Rumblefish, then, as you may know, I'm sure you know, so this is an adaptation of a work by S.E. Hinton. And so she is an author who has other works, other books that have been adapted into films, into other films. So Rumblefish is one of them. And another film that maybe you've seen, maybe you've not, I don't know, but it's called The Outsiders. This is also a Francis Ford Coppola film, also Matt Dillon. So if you're interested in another Francis Ford Coppola film starring Matt Dillon, based off of a story that was authored by the same author who authored the story that was the basis for Rumblefish, then I think you'd be maybe you'll find The Outsiders to be an interesting compare-contrast type of thing. It is in some ways very similar. It's also in some ways quite unique, and so that might be an interesting pairing with Rumblefish. In fact, I really think it is. And also, it's not a Coppola film, but it's a Matt Dillon film, also a film that's based off of a work by S.E. Hinton. It's called Tex, T-E-X, Tex. Now, I'm not sure as to its availability on DVD, because I haven't seen it on DVD. I don't own it, but I have seen it. I did see it a while back, and again, that's another kind of, it has a similar type of vibe, I suppose, but again, it's from the same author, as it were, and so that might be another interesting mode of comparison. But again, I'm not sure if that's available. I'm not sure as to the wide availability of that film, text or anything of that nature. But returning to Rumblefish, and maybe if I could pick another non-Coppola film, there are some differences, but there are also a lot of striking similarities. So maybe I could suggest also, as a kind of totally different non-S.E. Hinton work, the Francois Truffaut film, The 400 Blows. If you haven't seen that already, I would strongly recommend checking it out. It's a wonderful film. It's a classic, very emotionally deep. And I would suggest also there are some links, maybe links in spirit anyway, to the concerns and the approach of the film Rumblefish. So just in case you're interested, the film The 400 Blows. Incidentally, I will write down the titles of or filmmakers of anyone that I've mentioned in this video. I will write them down in the description box, if you want to check them out. Please feel free to do so. But Marco, once again, thank you so much for your lovely comment and your great question. And along the way, of course, if you watch any other films that you think are worth mentioning or worth talking about, you want to share with me, you want to share with everyone else, you want to recommend to me at any time, my friend, please feel free to leave a comment here or in any other video, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about cinema. So thank you so much, and I hope you're well. Okay, so next is a number of questions from Cody T. So hello, Cody, how are you doing? And let's see what you have to say. Edited to add a few things since leaving this on the other video. Hello, Daisuke. I was saving these for when there were enough questions to warrant another video. Didn't want to inconvenience you for a couple of questions. I would like to ask, what are your favorite non-Kurosawa, Mizoguchi, Kobayashi films that take place in feudal Japan? That's an interesting question. Wow, that's an interesting question. So, so this is a very interesting question for a number of reasons. First is you bring up an interesting point, which is that while Japanese cinema is, of course, strongly represented, especially outside of Japan, by the towering achievements left behind by filmmakers like Kobayashi, or Mizoguchi, or Kurosawa, as you, I think, so astutely refer to. I think also implicit in your question is that there are a vast number of great films in Japanese cinema that aren't directed by either one of these gentlemen. And so I really like this question very much. I could go on and on about non-Kurosawa, Mizoguchi, Kobayashi films that take place in feudal Japan. But I think if I could mention one, maybe it would be the film, I don't know if it's available in outside of Japan, but it's called Ryoma Ansatsu, or it's sometimes translated into English as The Assassination of Ryoma. And the filmmaker is Kazuo Kuroki. And so I would suggest... oh gosh, is it available or not? I don't know, but Kazuo Kuroki is the name of the filmmaker. And once again, the film is called Assassination of Ryoma, or Ryoma Ansatsu, and I'll leave a link below. And again, if it's not available, I'm really sorry, but that is such a striking, very almost gritty, it has a feel of like a, I don't know what the antecedent would be or what the comparison would be, but it's not a perfect comparison, but it's almost like a grainy, it's like it's a film set in sort of a feudal era Japan, perhaps, and it has a filmmaking sensibility of a grainy, earthy, black and white John Cassavetes film. I don't know if that makes any sense, but in terms of its visual style, but it has a kind of an impact and a real immediacy that makes it, I think, quite strikingly different from one's expectation of what this sort of classical style Japanese films are meant to be, and it really goes in a lot of different and really exciting places. So I do hope that it is available outside of Japan, but if it's not, I apologize. But in any event, just keep your eye out for it just in case it does get released. So that is Ryoma Ansatsu, directed by Kazuo Kuroki. Again, a very interesting filmmaker, one whose works I wish could be made more available outside of Japan, because I have a number of his works on Japanese DVD, but I've been just waiting for the chance to be able to speak more about them here on this channel, but including Ryoma Ansatsu, The Assassination of Ryoma, which is the film that I mentioned. It's, I think, from 1974. So again, 1974, Ryoma Ansatsu, or the Assassination of Ryoma, as it's sometimes translated into English. So anyway, so thank you very much for that great question. Okay, and then your next question is, and do you have any favorite films that incorporate yokai or other elements of Japanese folklore and the Shinto religion? So that's a very good question as well. So yokai or Shinto or other elements of folklore. So I think for me, again, I could I should just give just a number of examples only, because I could go on and on about this. But maybe and you probably know these films already, but the Yokai Monsters, I think that's the English title, Yokai Monsters cycle of films from the 1960s. And I think that those films are some of my favorites. They're quite stylized, and they of course build on this mythology or folklore, or the yokai, these monsters, or these kind of folklore type of creatures, etc., as you know. And so the Yokai Monsters film series from the 1960s, I think, is really worth checking out. And then, of course, there's the Great Yokai War as well, which came a little bit later, Takashi Miike, as you know, which is also a very good one. But there's that as well. And then also, I'm a big fan, it's not a film, but I'm a big fan of the Japanese anime called GeGeGe no Kitaro. The series GeGeGe no Kitaro is quite good, and it's a manga, but I'm actually I really like the anime very much, and it's actually playing sometimes here on Japanese TV, and so I get a chance to watch it fairly regularly here, and it's still quite scary and very fun to watch. So those are just some examples, I think, of the incorporation of yokai into some works that I really like. But that's a really great question, so thank you very much for that. And then your last question is, lastly, do you have any recommendations for getting into Chinese cinema? I'm well aware of the films of Zhang Yimou and Bigan, as well as Hubo's An Elephant Sitting Still, and obviously Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which I believe was a co-production across several countries. But outside of that, I don't hear much about mainland Chinese cinema. Okay, so your question is about mainland Chinese cinema. So again, I haven't spoken a lot about mainland Chinese cinema, but I really should try to do that. But you mentioned a few names already, so of course you already have a strong familiarity with Chinese cinema, which is really great. Maybe to add to that list, if you're talking about, say, fifth generation Chinese cinema, maybe other filmmakers to keep in mind would be Chen Kaige, alongside of Zhang Yimou, as you mentioned. And then maybe sixth generation, maybe the filmmaker Zhangke as well. And also, if you're looking for an earlier work, the filmmaker is called Fei Mu, and this is from 1948, and the film is called Spring in a Summer Town. Sorry, not Spring in a Small Town. Excuse me, Spring in a Small Town. Pardon me, from 1948, Fei Mu. And Spring in a Small Town is it's a film that I think yes, it's available on a BFI DVD, and I have that, in fact, and so I know for sure it's available, and I think it's still available. I don't think it's out of print yet, and that's a film that I would love to talk about one day. I've actually been waiting for the opportunity to talk more about that particular film. If you are looking for a really powerful, just a masterful example of cinema from that early period, then please check out Spring in a Small Town. And I think it's fairly accessible and fairly easy to get one's hands on, again, assuming that BFI DVD is still in print, and I think it is. I don't think it's a Blu-ray. I think it's just a DVD for now, but That is one that people should watch. So there's that, and maybe another filmmaker to keep in mind is a more modern filmmaker, documentary filmmaker called Wang Bing. Wang Bing. And the film by Wang Bing that I'm particularly just in awe of, I mean, in awe of a number of his works. I'm very fortunate that a number of his works have been made available here in Japan through Japanese DVD releases. But the one that I saw of his, the first work I ever saw of his, was the film Cheshichu, or West of the Tracks. West of the Tracks. And I spoke about it very, very briefly in the early days of this YouTube channel. And I'm always thinking I would want to just sit down and talk about that, try to work out my feelings about that film, because that is such a, and I mean this in a positive way, that is such a difficult film to watch. And it's very, very moving. And to see the landscape that's being presented in this great wide landscape that is still so close to the people that it's portraying and depicting, unbelievably moving. So and it's just such an impact. So that's the film West of the Tracks by Wang Bing. Again, I'll leave this information in the description box below in case you're interested. And there are many others, many others, and I can't mention them all, but those are just some other names to add to your list, which is already really, really excellent. So I hope that that helps out, Cody. So thank you very much for your questions, and I hope you're well. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now, and I'm sorry because I know that there are other questions there left behind, so I will keep on doing these Q&A videos as much as I can, so I will address any questions that are still left behind in future videos. So I just ask for your patience and understanding with respect to that. And until we meet again, my friends, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Once again, thank you so much for your time, as always, and cheers.